moment of historical change, and I don't know what the outcome of it is going to be, but we are in the midst of sweeping economic change. We are in the midst of sweeping political change. And guess what? Every single one of you as federal employees is right in the middle of this huge ideological debate in terms of the future of America. I also wish that I could come before you this afternoon and kind of do what, many of you would like me to do, is speak in a nonpartisan way, but I can't be honest with you and do that because you're living in the midst of a Congress which is more partisan than it has ever been, certainly in our lifetimes, and you gotta at least hear from me about what my views are, what's going on. And I think it would be unfair to you not to kind of give you that perspective. So what's going on? What's going on economically in this country? How does it impact you? What's the trend that we have been seeing, not just in the last few years since the recent recession, but even before that? What's going on is a monumental shift in terms of a shrinking middle class. And a lot of the wealth and income that was in the middle class is going to the people on top. So that's the first point. But what we are seeing now today is unemployment, not just at 7.5% nationally, and it's lower in the state of Vermont, and we should be very happy about that. Do you know what real unemployment in this country is? If you count those people who have given up looking for work and are working part-time when they want to work full-time, it's close to 14%. And for younger people, the numbers are far greater than that. Now, in terms of wealth, which at the end of the day, you're going to work for decades. We've all worked our whole lives. Most Americans work their whole lives. What do you have at the end of it? But what's going on now, in terms of wealth disparity, is the top 1% in America own 38% of the wealth of this country. Okay, so if you had 100 people in the room, you have one person who owns 38% of all the wealth in America. Who wants to guess what the bottom 60% own?
1%.
What's the guess? The answer is 2.3%. Top 1% owns 38% of the wealth. Bottom 60% owns 2.3%. Bottom 40% own nothing at all. And that is people, in many cases, have worked their whole lives. They owe more than they have. Got nothing. And that disparity of the people on top, what we call the 1%, and everybody else, is growing wider. So you end up with one family, the Walton family that owns Walmart, owning more wealth than the bottom 40% of the American people. Right? Terms of income, that is what we made last year. Top 1% earns more than the bottom 50%, but here's an unbelievable fact. The last study that we've seen suggests that between 2009 and 2011, all, ALL, of the new income generated in the economy went to the top 1%. And everybody else saw a decline in their income. And that certainly applies to you. Because what you have seen, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, in the last 3 years for most of you, has been a pay freeze. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, pay freeze. And number two, especially for the younger workers entering the federal workforce, they're going to be asked to pay a lot more for their retirement benefits, for their pensions, correct?
Yeah.
So you add all that together, we're talking about a fairly significant decline in wages and benefits for federal employees. Okay. So that's the reality. A shrinking middle class, poverty very high, people on top doing phenomenally well, corporations enjoying record-breaking profits. That's economically. Politically, what's happening? Well, as a result of, well, there are a lot of factors, and I'm not going to go on for, you want to eat lunch, and I'm not going to go on for terribly long, but what's going on now in recent years for a whole variety of reasons, a Republican Party, the Republican Party that we grew up with in the state of Vermont, people like George Aiken or Jim Jeffers or Bob Stafford or Dean Davis, all those people that everybody in the state of Vermont knows, none of those people would be welcome in today's Republican Party. Because all of those guys and many others were what we call moderate Republicans. I disagreed with them, they're more conservative than I am, but they were moderate Republicans. They believed in education, they believed in women's rights, they believed in environmental protection. And the truth, the simple truth is, people like that, people like Dwight David Eisenhower, Republican, would not be welcome in today's Republican Party, which has moved very, very far to the right. And the Democratic Party over the years has also moved to the right as well, not nearly as far, of course. So that's where you are politically. And people all over this country ask a simple question. I go all over the country. And they say, let's see, middle class is being slammed. I worry whether my kids can afford to go to college. I worry how I'm going to take care of my mom who can't afford her prescription drugs. I worry what's going to happen to my retirement. Who's there protecting me? You got lobbyists all over Washington, D.C. who are making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. Any of you going to campaign events, contributing tens of thousands of dollars to the candidate of your choice, so that when you go to Washington, you could sit down for an hour and tell him or her all of your problems? Probably not. Who's representing you? Who's representing the middle class or the working class in this country? And people are very worried that there's nobody, very few voices out there for them. Okay. Now, what's going on and where you get impacted, and here's where the great debate, and I know Congressman Welch touched on this. In the 1930s, as all of you know, in the midst of the Great Depression, Roosevelt came in and changed the historical role of the federal government in people's lives. Massive unemployment, people are hungry, and he said, you know what, the federal government has got to be involved. They introduced a whole lot of programs that many of you are familiar with. And more or less that trend continued. Lyndon B. Johnson, it actually expanded. Said that old people, when they get sick, they need health care, Medicare. Poor people, when they get sick, need health insurance, Medicaid. Kids need help going to college, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. The great debate right now is what is the role of the federal government in our lives? There are some people who say that, you know, Social Security, which has been around for about 77 years, you know what, not only do we want to cut Social Security, we think Social Security is unconstitutional. We think the federal government should not be involved in people's retirement. If you want a strong retirement, well, put your money aside, invest it in stocks, do whatever you think is appropriate. That's your decision. Federal government should not be involved in Social Security. Federal government should not be involved in health care, Medicare, Medicaid, other health programs for children. Should not be involved in nutrition, making sure that people don't go hungry. That if you are hungry, if you are sick, there are places that you can go. Go to the local church. Go to the local charity. Federal government should not be there. There are people who, in the midst of the great global warming crisis that I believe we face, who think we should abolish the Department of Energy, abolish the Department of Education, significantly shrink the federal government. That is one view held by right-wing Republicans who now control the U.S. House of Representatives. Now, some of us, and maybe me more than anybody else in the United States Senate, holds a very different point of view. And that I believe that in a democratic, civilized society, our obligation as a people is to make sure that every single man, woman, and child in this country has at least a minimum standard of living. That all of our people are entitled to decent health care programs. That when you get old, you should have a strong Social Security system and a retirement system there for you. Before Social Security, half of the people, the elderly people in this country, lived in poverty. Today the number is 9%. And yet there are people who want to destroy Social Security. So that is what the struggle is, and there are people in this room who may have, I'm sure we all do have differences of opinion. What kind of society do we want to live in? 22% of our kids live in poverty. Millions of families are struggling right now to put food on the table, pay the bills. Should we continue with the kind of income and wealth inequality that we have? Should we address that issue? So those are the struggles that we have. The immediate struggle right now in terms of sequestration in the budget is the following. I am a member of the Budget Committee and work very hard on a budget which essentially does the following. It says that yes, deficit reduction is an important issue. And by the way, what many of you probably don't know, and you should know, is that we have made significant progress already on deficit reduction. Some years ago, it was 1.4 trillion, now it's going to be about 850 billion. Is that a lot of money? Sure. Should we do more? Absolutely. We have already made some progress. Second point, how do we get to the deficit that we're in right now? Anybody know? Clinton left office in the year 2000, we were running a surplus. Now we're running a significant deficit. The reason we're in deficit are two wars, Iraq and Afghanistan, that Bush and his friends forgot to pay for. Those are very expensive wars. You don't pay for them, you run a deficit. Tax breaks for the wealthy, you run a deficit. A recession caused, in my view, by the greed of Wall Street, less revenue comes in. So we worked on a budget which said the following. What we said is, yeah, we want to do deficit reduction, but you have to have some revenue coming in, and you can't just cut, and cut. So we said we're going to raise almost $1 trillion in new revenue by ending the absurdity of 1 out of 4 major corporations paying nothing in federal income taxes. Corporations today have the lowest effective tax rates since 1972. So we said before you cut Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and many other federal programs, maybe you ask the largest corporations in this country who are paying nothing in taxes to start paying their fair share of taxes, etc., etc. And we looked at waste within the government. Of course, we can make judicious cuts without hurting people. That is the debate. And then on the other side, a Republican friend said, no, no more revenue. Not a nickel more in revenue. And on top of that, we want to accelerate deficit reduction, which means massive cuts in virtually every program that you can think of. And that's the debate. And you have to reach your own conclusions about what is best for the American people. Do you think we just make massive cuts in Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, education, many other programs? Or do we ask that some of the folks doing very, very well pay more in taxes? That, in a nutshell, is what the debate is about. I think I've told you where I am coming from. So that's where we are. And let me just conclude by, in a sense, personally apologizing to you for some of the remarks that you see on TV every night. Some of my colleagues consider you to be, quote-unquote, faceless bureaucrats. You have no doubt heard that expression. I think you have faces. Many of them are very nice faces. Many of them are faces belonging to people who work day and night trying to do the right thing for their neighbors and for the people of this country. Many of them who are furloughed come into work or do their best because they have a job to do and they take their responsibility enormously seriously. And I think it's just unfair for you to be held responsible for problems of which you have not caused. So I conclude by very much appreciating the work that you do. Some of us are aware that you're working under great stress right now, that there are cuts and furloughs and attacks being made that are simply unfair and unjustified. So I just say carry on. I think better days will be coming, and many of us are very grateful for everything you do. Thank you very much.